Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim, and I'm happy to have you here today. And my guest for today is Petra Brunnbauer, and she is with, and I'll let her tell you more about what the Jōrni, Jōrni, but pronounced like Jōrni, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. And you can explain a little bit about that in a few minutes. But as always, I'm going to start with a quote, and the quote was provided for us by Petra. And the quote is really good. Trauma creates change you don't choose. Healing is about creating change you do choose. Oh, I love that. And that is by Michelle Rosenthal. My whole life has been about healing and growth and changing. I love it. So I know we're going to have a phenomenal conversation. But before we do jump in to that part, I invite you to share a little bit about who you are and how the Jōrni was created and what you do in the world.
Yeah. Thanks for having me today, Kim. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too.
I also think this will be a great episode. So, yeah.
It will, for sure.
A lot of the things about me are available online because I've posted them sort of on the website for the Jōrni. As you've already pointed out, this is sort of my baby for now that I'm working on. And the idea for the Jōrni actually started a long time ago, probably when I was still very young. The path was sort of laid to come eventually to this project that you see behind me. When I was 13, my parents decided to move us from Germany to Canada. And it was a very, should I say, delicate age to be kind of ripped out of school and away from your family and friends and to be taken to another country where you didn't speak the language, you didn't know anybody. And on top of that, we moved from a big city in Germany, Munich, into the middle of the forest in a really small town in Canada. We had no neighbors, and my parents had bought this piece of property. So it was a huge change, not just spatial change, but also cultural change. And with the language, the traditions that we weren't familiar with, we didn't know Thanksgiving, marshmallows, root beer, all of those cool things that I discovered. So I was sort of lost for a little bit when I was in my teens, and as we made our way through school, we connected with a lot of people. We made great friends, but I think at the core, our family was very German, and we kept those traditions alive. You know, we ate a lot of German foods. Still speak German at home, so there was a lot of things that we kept the way that they were. And so integrating and really becoming Canadian was a really different and difficult path for me. And I think that's where the first time I sort of lost my identity a little bit, coming into a new country and then trying to decide, well, who am I? Like, is this a new start? Do I have to be a different person now? Can I still be this person that I was in Germany? Or is this all different now because I have to speak differently? I have to look at things that maybe I didn't grow up with. A lot of people talked about cartoons or different things in school that I had no idea what they were, never seen them before. So it was a very difficult time in my life that I was going through. And my parents had traveled a lot. They actually traveled all around the world in there before I was born. And so I think they had a lot of experience with new cultures and learning new languages. But for my sister and I, that was the first time that we had gone somewhere foreign. So it was definitely a lot harder for us. And from there, I started experiencing a mental distress. You know, I became a bit despondent. I dealt with anxiety, eating disorder. And so that move eventually kind of kicked off, like I said, this project without knowing it at the time, but that's kind of really where it started. And I struggled with that throughout university. I tried to find ways to cope, to manage, to still graduate, to have a job after, to take care of myself, look after the things that I needed. And it was a very difficult road, not finding answers to what was wrong with me, what was going on, and to not understanding why I just simply couldn't be happy, or why I just couldn't be full of life and have all these goals and be excited about the future. I didn't understand why I couldn't find that. And as I came into my 30s, there was a lot of alternative things that I had tried to figure all this out. And eventually, ended up on the path where I found some answers. I found some things that worked all through all these different things I tried. I certified through some of those things and started using them in my own life. And I started understanding why this path hadn't really come together beforehand. So those are some of the things that came in the background of creating the journey. And in 2018, I had a very, very difficult year. Many of my family members passed away. This was before COVID, but some of them were elderly, my grandmother and my aunt, and some of them were very young. My best friend passed away of a heart attack, and he was in his late 30s. So it was a very difficult year. And especially through that experience, I thought, you need tools, you need ways to solidify what you're doing, you need ways to cope, you need ways to manage. If you're going to find this authentic path for yourself that you're going to be happy with, if you're going to really shine and put yourself out there, you need tools and you need ways to actually live this authentic life with. And so that's where the idea of the journey was born, a wellness platform that can help you unlock your mental, physical, emotional well-being and bring that all together so that you can find happiness and you can find optimal health and you can actually pursue that path. Like sometimes we can't really see the forest for all the trees, it seems. That's kind of what happened to me. And so, yeah, creating the journey was part of my own journey for healing through those things and making that conscious change through all the trauma that changed me in ways that I didn't really choose, into coming onto that path and making a change that I really wanted to choose for myself and for my family.
Oh my goodness. What a beautiful story. First of all, my condolences for your losses.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And oh God, what a story. And I love the ending that you're choosing, to be on this path. And it is about choice, right? It is about choice. We can't control, we can't change people, places, and things. We have no power to do that. The only thing we have control over is ourselves. The only thing we can change is us, and we can make choice. We can make choice. We have the power to make choice. So I love that I just want to underscore that. I love that you named that. I love that you are calling your project The Journey, and it was a journey for you. It's like a perfect name for it. And so going back to your story a little bit, and I liked how you said when you were 13, that was the beginning of the project. You just didn't know it yet. And I thought to myself, that's interesting, because my project or my podcast is Masks Off. And I didn't know back when I was a teenager that the same thing was happening, right? I was starting on the path. And that is such a volatile time, right? It's such an important time, a
absolutely.
pivotal time in our lives when we're teenagers. And we all come into the world knowing that we are worthy of love and we're worthy of belonging. When we're babies and we're little toddlers, if we have food all over us or mud, we're not like, oh my God, I don't look good. Like, what is somebody going to say? We're just like being our true authentic self. We're just being in essence. We're just being. And that can happen and stick with us for a while, depending on our circumstances and our background and upbringing. But I feel like for myself, I kind of stayed into my essence until I was like around 10. And I went through puberty at a really young age. I was 11. And then that just changed everything, because I was different. Like you said, you went to a new country and everything was different when you went to Canada. right? Everything. And I'm sure there had to be, based upon what you were saying, your experience was like, that there had to be a feeling or a sense of I'm different. And
Yeah,
maybe even
absolutely.
underneath that, a sense of I'm not okay either, because I don't fit in with the culture here. I don't speak the language. I don't know the traditions. So like there's this maybe messaging or sense underneath that I'm different and it's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there
And for
was.
me, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing because it's not that people, purposely made me feel
Yeah.
that way, but it was just because I didn't have the history and the connection that a lot of them had. They went to kindergarten together, their families grew up together, their families lived in the same town. My family was, all the way across the ocean. So it just
Exactly.
ended up being that way, even though everyone made a huge effort to make me feel welcome and they invited me to their gatherings and made me part of their groups. But there was always underneath that thing that I knew I wasn't Canadian. I
Yeah.
wasn't born there and I wasn't part of that crowd. So yeah,
Yeah.
that
So
switches
there's
sometimes.
that sense of Tara Brach will often reference it by saying like there's a sense or a feeling of wrongness in some
Yeah.
way. And that's how it was for me when I went through puberty at such a young age, because now I look very different from my peers.
Yeah.
And the boys made fun of me for it. And even some of the girls made fun of me for it, because now I went from looking one way to looking something different. Almost, it felt like overnight. And
Yeah.
it wasn't okay the way that I looked. And I was just going through something that was natural. Every girl goes through it and normal, but it was just like at a very young age. So
Yeah.
there's this sense of wrongness, this sense of I'm not okay. And then because of it, and it sounds like maybe this was true for you too, that then there's what kicks in is how do I overcompensate for that? How
Yeah.
do I cope? How do I deal with this feeling of I'm not okay and I'm different? And then for me, what was born was the perfection mask and the pleasing mask. Let me
Yeah.
just perform, please, and perfect as much as I possibly can, because then people will love me. If I'm
Yeah.
perfecting, people will love me. If I'm pleasing, people will love me. If I'm performing, and yada, yada, yada. So that's how it was born for me. And I think what's really important too is you said like everyone did their best to welcome you into their culture. And I'm not saying I don't even know what your mom and dad did in order to help during that phase. And even if our parents didn't show up for us in the way we needed, it's not to blame them, but it is a reality, right? So and I think many parents just aren't trained to really be aware or tuned in, like really tune into their children to know like what they are going through and to
Mhm.
help them guide that. Now, I'm sure there are some that do. I'm sure there's many that do. And even today, there's way more parents trying to become conscious
Yeah.
today because of all like the work that you're doing and social media and everything else. Like the paradigm has to shift
Yeah.
from what it was to what it needs to be. So for me, I know I had these feelings, these big feelings of I'm not okay, but I never went to my mom and said, I'm feeling less than, I feel unworthy, I feel unlovable, I don't feel I'm thin enough, pretty enough, smart enough, whatever, and she didn't, for whatever reason, tune in and ever help me through that. So
Mhm.
the coping mechanisms just kicked in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And then thus
And
the masks off was born for me, because it's like, okay, I can no longer abandon myself.
yeah.
I can no longer live in this fear. And that's what it is, fear of feeling so unworthy. Like I'm not okay inherently to be in this world. So it was like, I need to take these masks off, stop pleasing, stop perfecting, stop rescuing, caretaking, whatever the beauty mask, all of that stuff,
Yeah.
and coming back home to my true and authentic self. The little girl that love to play in the snow, love to play in the leaves, and, swim and just be so connected to nature. And that's when I knew, when I was connected with nature, that I was divine. That's when I was connected to my source and my essence. And then that just like went away. So does any of that relate to your story as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I grew up in a very loving home. My mom was a homemaker, so she was always there for us. She prepared meals. And when we got home from school, she was there. And that changed when we moved to Canada because my parents actually opened their own business. And so my mom then was involved in the business and actually started working full time with my dad. So we had my grandparents who also moved from Germany to Canada with us. And so there was always somebody there at the house when we were done school, or I would go over to their office and wait until they were done, and then we'd all drive home. So I grew up in a really loving home. And I don't think my parents for a second wouldn't have supported me if they had understood or maybe known what was going on. But the thing is that they were also trying to establish an existence in a country that they didn't know. They were trying to provide for us. They were trying to provide a house for us. So they had their own problems, and they also weren't in school like we were. So their experience, and I'm not really sure because I don't think we've talked about that in detail, but I would imagine their experience was quite different from our experience, from my sister and I's, because they weren't really involved with many teenagers, and they didn't
Yeah.
have to worry about, the coming of age, the finding friends for his boyfriend, driver's license, all those things. They had already been through all that. So I think for them it was a bit different. And the one thing that I did to compensate for all those masks is I tried to have control, right? So I tried to control my grades. I tried to control my calendar was always full. I was running from one thing to another. I was doing school. I did Miss Cranbrook. There was always things going on. I was always busy, and extra credits and this and that. So I tried to really take control of the things that I thought I had control over, to bring some semblance of a feeling that I was okay, or that I was in charge of things. I was in control of my life. And that eventually ended up leading to an eating disorder because I tried to control the food. And that did not work out very well. So all these new things that were happening, I think, were also very new for my parents. They had never had to deal with that before. And so this was a new experience for all of us. And I think we were all a little bit like, how do we deal with this? How do people get through this? And I have to say that at the time, there was definitely not as much internet, YouTube, all of those things available where you could even go and look things up and get an idea. I spent a lot of time in the library reading books, but the resources at the time were also limited. And so I think as we were facing these things together, there was a bit of a loss of okay, well, who's doing what? Where do we start? Or do we just ignore it and then it'll just get better on its own? So I can definitely relate to that, and thinking, things don't feel right. I don't feel at ease. I don't feel happy, but I have no idea where we start with this. I don't know where to go with this. And so a lot of what actually went on was a lot of figuring out and trying to find ways on how we could deal with it. And then of course I wanted to go to university. So having to separate again from my family unit and moving 10 hours away to another foreign city where I didn't know anybody was also then added on top of that. And then trying to find resources there, and trying to deal with the fact that my parents weren't there, my sister wasn't there. So I think all of that compounded a little bit in the fact that well, what can I control? So in this whole sea that I'm swimming in, what can I grab onto? What are the things that I can control in my life? And so that ended up very much like what you said, the beauty mask, the perfectionist mask, the just totally overwhelming myself with stuff mask so I don't have to think about things. And that works short term, but as you know,
Yeah.
that does not work. It does not work well long term. So,
It doesn't.
yeah.
It doesn't. And what I think I can say is, well, two things. I love that we are doing podcasts and connecting and being able to connect with our stories. Like when you are sharing how you overcompensated with grades and being busy and eating, I'm like, check, 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 check. Like, you know, are you my twin kind of thing? And I've had this happen over and over and over again with different guests that I have on the podcast. So I know that the suffering is universal. I mean, you're in France, right? Now you're from Germany. I'm in the United States. I've interviewed with people that are all over the world, all over the United States. And if you take all of our stories and all of our experiences, all the conversations that I have had, every single podcast, if you boil it down to what's underneath, it's so universal. It blows my freaking mind. It's like, and then what even more so is, like I said earlier, we all come into the world knowing that we are worthy of love and belonging. We come in with a clean slate. And how do we all, I mean, we know how, but the fact that we all get to this place, almost all of us either have experienced or continue to experience a sense of I'm not okay. And so I have to go through this world and this life being fearful, like of not being abandoned or rejected. But I'm super excited. What excites me is that we do live in an era where now we have podcasts, we have TikToks, we have Instagram, we have Facebook. We have so many people that are doing the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, that so many more people are doing to wake up. We are waking up and coming back home to our authentic selves, because the way we were living, the way we have existed is just not working for people. People are overweight. People are, you know, addicted to drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling. They feel so lost and unfulfilled in their relationships, in their jobs, in life. Like, what is my purpose? What is my meaning? And if we were just all connected as much as we possibly could be to our source and to the fact that we are whole, we would be
and we lose that somewhere along the way. We lose that. And were you ever told in your journey that's just normal? You know, because I was told so many times, oh, well, this is just part of being a student, or oh, this is just part of being a full-time working person, right? Like it was almost normalized, the fact that things just didn't line up and I didn't feel well. It was just a normal part of being a teenager, a normal part of growing up. Did you experience that too?
I totally felt that or was told, or like, this is just how it is. It's just a normal thing. Or the other message was, oh, don't worry, you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. No. I mean, yes, but you know, I don't think that people have to or should need to go decades of trying to figure it out. And that's the beauty of doing the work that so many in our generation are doing, so that the generations to come will have all this information, you know, at their fingertips. So you do lots of videos on mental health and mental well-being, how to, like you said, unhook so that you can be balanced and nourished, mind, body, and spirit. My daughter's 20. She watches TikToks all the time on mental health and mental well-being. She's in school for psychology as well. And her passion, her motivation is to raise awareness about mental health. And she tells me all the time about college, her college classmates, the amount of stress that they're under, the panic attacks. Panic attacks are not just a normal thing that we should just accept, you know? And so things have to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pressure of being a student today, it's maybe even a little bit different than when I was physically in university. I mean, now I do it online, but when I was physically in university at the beginning of 2000, mental health, they did have a free therapy for students at the university that I
Yes.
was at, which was quite impressive at the time, I think.
Mm,
And they were a little bit ahead of their time, which was great. But more often, you didn't really have a lot of support because there was so many students and so much
yeah.
pressure going on. The pressure to know what you wanted to study, to know what you wanted to be after you were done studying. The fact that, oh, if you don't get the right grades, you can't even go on to study anything else. So there's a huge amount of pressure in the education system that many people who don't go through university or college aren't really aware of. And part of that shaped me a lot too, and stayed with me until, now I did go back to school now, but I still think all the time, well, you have to prioritize yourself and your mental health while you are studying, because it's really too easy to fall back into those old patterns and say, I'm so stressed, I'm so anxious, I can't sleep, all I can think about is my exams, my assignments, like what am I going to do after this? And it's so easy to get back into that. And I really have to sit down sometimes and say to myself, look, you certified in all of these tools and all of these approaches. Lady, it's time that you use some of them on yourself. So, because it seems that when we train in things, we kind of forget to prioritize ourselves and actually use them on ourselves.
Yes.
So, I have to remind myself sometimes, and that's why I like the TikTok videos, because I can just watch them and I can really remind myself of, okay, you need to take some time, you need to calm down, rebalance, make sure you're nourished, you are recharged for what you're doing. But it's easy to forget that. So easy.
It's so easy. I totally agree, but it's so important. And I think this whole entire conversation was so important. I really, really enjoyed it. And we said it was going to be a good one. It was, um, like I said, I just so connected with your story. And I think just to round it all out, that what helps people the most is hearing story. So I thank you for sharing your journey, sharing your
Yeah.
story, because that is what people connect to.
Yeah.
That's what I connect to. I know when I'm listening to a podcast or, a show on TV, or it's when the stories of the hardship that we've gone through, but then also what we learned along the way to come out on the other side. And that's what you shared with us. So thank you so much. Before you leave, though, I have a few rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. What's your favorite food?
Oh, I love rouladen. It's like this rolled beef that has pickles and bacon in it, and then comes in a really good sauce. That's the German in me.
Okay, I was going to say, is that a German food or a French food? But you just answered that. So a German food. Okay, awesome. Well, this will be interesting for you. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go?
Oh, Kim, I have a huge list of places I want to go. But on the top of the list right now, I think are Iceland, which I think would be really cool.
Mm,
I'd love to visit Bulgaria. And I also would like to see the Seychelles Islands.
wow, that's
Top
a
three.
good. You said a long list. You're gonna
Yeah,
be
yeah. I have a massive travel bucket list. So
awesome. And I'm sure I could probably answer this for you, but just in case, what's your favorite way to take care of yourself?
yeah, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of sound healing. I'm certifying in sound healing, but for now, I'm using it on myself and my family. So right now, sound healing, music therapy, all those things are really high on my list, and they feel great.
And I just checked some of your videos. You do a lot of TikTok videos on the sound healing. So
Mhm.
be sure, people, to check that out. Name one book that has changed your life.
Oh, just one. Okay.
Mm,
Let's do. I read a book on existential therapy, which is by Emmy van Derzen, and she is the creator of a school in London that I'd like to go to after I'm done my master's. And I think her book has really entirely changed my perspective on therapy, on counseling, and on how we approach life and the question of the meaning, like what are we supposed to do? Why are we here? So that's
mm.
been a really impactful book.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you have one tip or one takeaway for the listeners?
Yeah. You know, the one thing looking back 40 years now is you have to somehow overcome the fear so that you can go for what you're meant to do. Because a lot of the times it's the fear of the unknown that held me back from actually pursuing anything. I was like frozen in place and I didn't know what to do. So, tackling that fear, finding ways to manage it, whether that is through self care, education, sometimes even just going for it. You know, if the risk is not very big, sometimes just going for it, but finding ways to tackle that fear so that you can step into the light where you're meant to be and where you're meant to shine and to find that path that you go on. So, that would be my one tip is like, go for it, figure out how to break that fear that is holding you back so you can move forward.
That's beautiful. Just do it, right? The Nike brand.
It's so much easier said than done. I totally realize that. But that is the one thing I wish I did more often is to just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you. So how can the listeners find you?
So they can find me pretty much everywhere online. I'm like omnipresent. So they can find me on thejōrni.com, which is journey like spelled in the background here. And from there, they can find all of the social media links. They can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're on Pinterest also. I'm starting to put some stuff together for YouTube. And we're also hosting a summit this year, a holistic wellbeing summit in May of 2023. So they will also be able to find more information on the Jōrni website for the upcoming summit.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
It was my pleasure. And thank you so much for what you do, Kim. I love that you share all these stories, that you highlight all these things that are happening, these different experiences that people have. And thank you so much for doing this podcast. I love it. And thanks for
Mm,
having me today.
thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Masks Off. And if you did like this content, this conversation today, I would love for you to subscribe or like, and I will see you next time on Masks Off.